Hello and welcome to another edition of VU Sports Wire, the fastest talking sports talk program in Music City. Cutler Klein, Simon Gibbs, Ryan G. Thank you so much as always for tuning in. We have a fantastic show for you this afternoon, talking all the latest in Commodore sports. But first, Vanderbilt Basketball last night, another tough loss on the road at Arkansas. Really heartbreaking game. Had the lead late, lost it after a great defensive possession, and then Saban Lee gets called for a charge with less than 10 seconds left. We could talk about officiating all day long. We can talk about all of this stuff, but quite simply, so far this season, Vanderbilt has not figured out a way to finish games in which they have a lead. And they had a lead in this one and blew it. They had to come back to get that lead, but they had a lead and blew it. So guys, it's hard to attribute it to one thing, but why can't this team finish any games off?
I mean, on the same note as them making the same mistakes and not being able to finish their games, they're making the same mistakes that are causing them to not be able to finish these games. From free throws to perimeter defense to defensive rebounding. Time and time again, they've proven that they're not quite there. And the improvement also isn't as adequate as I'd hope. Bryce Drew has said in many different press conferences that he assures he's working on the free throw shooting in practice. He assures he's going to fix the perimeter defense. And it's nothing against Bryce Drew. It could just be an experience thing. But I feel like I've yet to see any sort of improvement on that front. I mean, again, 61.9 from the charity stripe yesterday, and that's become a good number for us, which is scary because there have been some 50% games. And you can blame it on the refs, and I do think, home versus South Carolina, 3-point loss after a technical foul call that was questionable. Home versus Tennessee, 5-point loss where there was a technical foul that was questionable. Away versus Arkansas, charged with less than, 10 seconds left, and a 3-point loss. Yeah, you could blame a certain aspect of the game on those calls, and yes, Vanderbilt has had to play against the refs seemingly all season so far, but you really just can't make that sort of sorry excuse. I think the Commodores do have a lot of work this offseason. Their work is definitely cut out for them. But I think if they could improve even slightly in all of these aspects from, as I mentioned before, defensive rebounding, perimeter defense, and free throw shooting, I think this team will look completely different next season. But again, that is if they show any sort of improvement on those fields.
I mean, I completely agree with what you're saying. I think I focus specifically in on two of those categories, which is the free throw shooting and the officiating that they've had to deal with. The officiating, yeah, you can point to multiple instances this season where even if they get half of those, then that's at least 2 or 3 more games that they've won than the 0 conference wins that they have. But beyond that, one of the biggest things about closing out games is when it turns into a free throw shooting contest towards the end if it's a tight game. And Vanderbilt consistently all season has not had anyone to step up and hit those free throws. And even if they do acquire that one person who's hot for the night, then the other team can just target other players that have been doing pretty shabby from the free throw line. So they're going to have to improve that. And again, it is discouraging to see that Bryce Drew over and over again says, we're going to improve this, we're working on it, and it just doesn't seem to be getting any better. I think another thing that we maybe take into account here is that we've talked many times about how this is a really young team, and so perhaps they're losing some of their poise in high-pressure moments, something like that, trying to learn to deal with the spotlight, but even that's kind of a fleeting excuse this late in the season, given that you've played 20 games together at this point almost.
I've never been much of a fan of the whole inexperience equals bad free throws comparison. But when Cutler brought it up weeks ago, I was fully on board because he gave me good reason. There had only been a few games where the free throws were bad enough, and it had only been once or twice that Coach Drew was asked about the free throws in the press conference. But much like Ryan said, it's becoming an excuse that's just not worthy anymore. I mean, it's getting really bad.
I mean, how long does that even remain an excuse? Because,
right, exactly.
SEC experience is experience. You've gone through close games before. You've gone through close games against the number 1 team in the country. I feel like it's almost like having a donut on your bat where now you're playing in a close game against a much lesser opponent, and you still can't figure it out. I mean, how long does inexperience remain an excuse for not just the free throws, because obviously there's a whole mental aspect with free throws, but how long does that remain an excuse for everything that's going wrong with this team across the board?
Yeah. And I will say that again, to focus specifically on the free throws before we move on, I think certain players, and most notably Saban Lee, who, look, I mean, we could talk about Saban Lee's weaknesses all day long, but he has an absolute massive burden on his back, being the pretty much sole point guard and sole playmaker on this Vanderbilt offense right now after the Darius Garland injury. So all credit to Saban Lee, but as a point guard, you have to be able to shoot better from the free throw line than he has done so far, especially when his game is just penetrating, getting fouled, and getting sent to the line. I mean, he's just not been efficient enough from the free throw line.
Absolutely. And I mean, I don't really know what more, if they are indeed working towards improving free throws and this is the result, or the lack thereof, I should say, then I'm not sure what they need to go about doing in order to make it better. I'm not sure if you can make it better, but I agree that at this point, there aren't really any excuses for not winning these games. I mean, you've had most of the team together the entire season. You've had time to try and improve those free throws, and you've had multiple opportunities. It wasn't like this is just a one-off earlier in the season compared to a one-off later in the season.
Yeah.
This is consistently every other week, it seems. There's a close game that Vanderbilt's been in, and they fall apart in the last minute.
I hate to say it, but Vanderbilt's best free throw shooter was Darius Garland. He made them
Well, that's
time
no
and
secret.
time again.
That's
no, it's
no
no
secret.
secret. Yeah, I mean, it's tough to think about, but he really was. Now, with only a few games left in SEC play, I mean, they have basically a month left or so of the regular season. How vital do you think it is just to get one win? Just to be able to say you won an SEC game, that you were able to pull one out. I mean, how much? I know it probably doesn't mean much in the long run, but just to give this young team the reassurance that they are good enough to win a game. How much do you think that should be emphasized going forward the rest of the year? Just to get one, to have something to build on going into next year instead of having to really start from scratch.
I'm going to start out by playing devil's advocate and say I don't care if they win a game. I don't think they should care if they win a game. I think they should focus on showing improvement in the very fields that have caused them to lose so many close games. If you could prove that you can make free throws, if you prove that you can rebound on defense, if you prove that you are losing not because of those little mistakes, not because you were being outplayed, but simply because maybe the talent or the depth this year happens to be lacking, then I'd be satisfied. However, we do have an away game against Tennessee, and I'm not expecting much, but boy, would that be nice to go on the road and beat a number one Tennessee team after this past game. So look, a win would be great, but that should not be the priority of the players. That should not be what fans should hope for. Well, obviously you should, but it should more so be simply improvement in the very fields that they have yet to improve in.
I think, on the counter, that an SEC win is absolutely essential to this team. I agree entirely with what you're saying about just focusing on improvement. We talked about it about a show or two ago, about how if you're going to try and salvage this season, you need to make it about giving the fans hope, improving, prepping for next year, things like that. But if, just as we're talking about all these close games that they could have won by improving in those fields that you're talking about, the only way that you really improve from where we're at now is by doing those things, which is going to result in winning a game. So, I just kind of look at it as the next logical step in the progression of the team, in them improving, is actually putting it all together for a game and winning one. I don't really think there's a whole lot of value personally in seeing them shoot really, really well from the free throw line one game, but be completely abysmal at defensive rebounding, for example, or anything like that. You have to put it all together in one performance to show you have the capability to do everything you need to do on a given night to win, rather than just pick and choose which skills you're going to put into play for any game.
Right, and I totally see what you're saying there. I think that you have to see all the pieces come together, all the improvement happen at once, really. But the reason why I say you can't expect or hope for a win necessarily is that I think to a certain extent this team is a little bit handicapped at the moment, and it has nothing to do with the current roster. It has nothing to do with the players. I think we're an extremely talented team. It's just that the entire game plan has been makeshift since Darius Garland's injury. I mean, the offense is clearly not the same. The depth at pretty much every position is clearly not the same. And I think at the end of the day, experience may not be the excuse for free throws, but there is a certain aspect of experience that plays into, for example, number one Tennessee with so many talented seniors being the team that they are. I mean, these guys have been through it all. None of them were 5-star recruits coming out of high school. And then Admiral Schofield comes out and, well, against Vanderbilt, he was pretty abysmal. But against most teams this year, Admiral Schofield has proven himself as an elite player. And that's simply because he's gone through the steps. He's made it through the process that I think Vanderbilt is ultimately going to start in the near future with this whole gradual improvement.
And I want to be clear that I agree with you that perhaps having high expectations as them winning a majority of their games left is obviously unreasonable. But I think the point that I'm trying to emphasize is all these categories that we are expecting them to improve in, that we're hoping for them to improve in.
They would win.
If you were to improve that, it would meet, like, the measuring stick of whether you're improving that or not is wins, rather than the given statistical category at the end of the night. So I think also just having a win is, like I said, it's about putting it all together. So having a win on the resume from the conference play is essential to the confidence of the team, in that when you are able to put it all together on one night, then you are accomplishing the actual goal you set out to accomplish. No professional, no college team sets out on any given night to just say, okay, our goal tonight is to shoot 40% from the three line, or whatever the goal happens to be. It's to win the game by doing well enough in all categories that you get there. And so by doing that, you show that, one, you can win, period. Two, you can put together multiple skills in a single game in order to win. And three, if you do, say they were to do it twice, then that's a humongous confidence booster, especially if it's in two different kinds of ways, because then you show, okay, if we're kind of bad in this area on a given night, then we can be good in all these other areas, and we can use a different set of skills and tactics in order to win on a different night.
Also, in Ryan's defense, I think if they had significantly improved in one of these fields, or had been improving in one of these fields, they would have won at least 3 games in South Carolina, Tennessee, and Arkansas. I think if they had shown slight improvement in all of the fields, who knows how many wins they'd have right now.
The world may never know.
The world will never know. The first opportunity for this team to get an SEC win Saturday at home against Alabama should be a fun game for sure. But we can only talk about this team for so long. We got to move on to football here. Vanderbilt just held its late signing day today. Big addition that's now confirmed. He's on campus. Riley Neal, grad transfer quarterback from Ball State, could be an integral part of this team as they look to move on from Kyle Shermer after he graduates and hopefully enters the NFL. Guys, there's a whole lot of competition that's going to happen here at the quarterback position. Alan Walters, redshirt freshman, going to be in the mix. Deuce Wallace, perhaps Riley Neal's biggest competitor. Jamil Muhammad's also on campus. Mo Hassan is still there. How do you see this quarterback battle shaping out? Who do you think is the front runner to land this job? I mean, to me, I think it's a 2-horse race between Wallace and Neal. I mean, you kind of have to watch out for Alan Walters in the end.
I think that Wallace or Neal will end up with the jobs come the start of the season. One of those two will be starting. But to be completely honest, I'm not going to lament too much on those two, because I really think Alan Walters should be the guy. And I say that having not seen him play a single snap, having not seen him in practice. I have no idea what he's like as a quarterback. I have just read about him in high school and how fantastic he was throughout the recruiting process. I mean, he had, of his, 20, 30 offers, you saw Bama, you saw Michigan, you see the big schools that wanted him. Granted, he may have not played there, but for a quarterback that highly touted coming out of high school, I don't see him ever becoming better if you don't at least give him a chance. I mean, who's to say you put him in once, he doesn't know what he's doing, he seems inexperienced, at least he's going to learn from that one mistake or that one game. But so long as he's going to redshirt a second year or really not play much for 2 years in a row now, it doesn't make much sense to me. And I think that especially in a year where you have a running game once more. I mean, you have Keyshawn Vaughn again. And so at that point, you have Pinckney as well. You're returning the weapons in which I think you can justify starting a quarterback with little experience. You can justify putting in a quarterback who will build throughout the season. But at the same time, I think the opposite argument can and should be made that when you have these players returning, you should be in win now mode and you should put in someone with more experience, maybe, a Riley Neal or a Deuce Wallace.
I think it's a really intriguing idea that you bring up putting in Walters, and I'll address that first and then get to the kind of whole Neal versus Wallace debate. But Walters himself is a really interesting idea in terms of starting him as the quarterback to begin the year. I'm not completely opposed to giving it a try.
Right.
I'm not sure if I would say that he should be the starter,
Yeah.
but I think he should get some playing time regardless. Say in a non-conference game where Vanderbilt's up by a bunch, throw him in there, see how he does. Don't limit the offense in that case because there's no risk to it if you're already up and if it's that kind of situation. Throw him in there, find out what his full capabilities are, how he meshes with the rest of the players and weapons. And if he shows promise, then it kind of becomes a competition, or maybe you even put him in ahead of the two more experienced guys. As for Wallace versus Riley Neal, I tend to think that Deuce Wallace should probably get the nod if the debate's simply going to come down to those two, just because personally, having seen Deuce Wallace in this program for 2 years, I've always been a fan of bringing in and promoting homegrown talent, that kind of thing. So bringing in a grad transfer like Riley Neal, who was good, not great, but good at Ball State, I would rather see what a guy like Deuce, who's been in the system for 2 years now, studying under Shermer, has shown some good upside when he's, had some playing time and then, the word of mouth from scrimmage and stuff like that. I think between the two of them, if it just comes down to that, he should probably get the nod. But I think it's a very intriguing and probably a good idea to try and implement Walters a little bit and see what he's capable of.
I would like to point out the subtitle below, quarterback competition. We are operating on the belief that there is a competition. We haven't seen them get on the field yet. We haven't, they haven't really started practicing. But if one player ends up, turning some heads in the preseason, then we may not be having an argument about this. And I fully believe that if one player significantly outperforms the rest, he should absolutely be the starter. But I think it's tough in this situation, although I will say I don't think Mo Hassan should be the starting quarterback. I do like the idea of bringing him in for some options every once in a while because Vanderbilt has never been a school where you have to worry about having a dual threat quarterback. And if Baylor showed us anything, it's that we weren't prepared for that ourselves. So who knows? Maybe it'll show some other SEC teams to, sag off a little bit.
I think Derek Mason has shown over the last few years his willingness to, base who he plays on what happens in practice. Even though this past year, everyone thought going into the year that Javin Rice would be the kicker. He's a scholarship guy. He's been really great. Then Riley Gay comes in practice and just is drilling field goals and is showing off just an incredible leg. Obviously, the season didn't turn out the way he wanted it to go, certainly. But overall, he got in there because he showed how good he was in practice. And I think that's what it's going to come down to is when they get into spring ball, when they get into summer camps, who's good, who is the guy that's showing the most ability? If it's Walters, if it's Jamil Muhammad, if it's Riley Neal, he's going to be the guy that takes the reins. But having this depth here is such a crucial aspect of it because that means, before it was basically if Kyle Shermer got hurt, this past year, their offense would have stagnated as good as Mo Hassan was. Kyle Shermer was really the engine that drove that forward. So now if they go with Riley Neal to start, he falters or gets hurt, you throw in Deuce Wallace, you throw in Alan Walters, you put in any of those other guys. The third aspect of it that I think is going to come down to it is whoever the new offensive coordinator is.
Absolutely.
If the offensive coordinator comes in and says, I'm interested in running run-pass option, maybe Deuce Wallace has a leg up. If they come in looking for that pro style that Vanderbilt's been known for the last few years, then maybe it's a little more of an open competition. So I think the offensive coordinator is going to have a lot to do with it.
Yeah, I agree. And what excites me about this football team is we could talk all day about how Vanderbilt basketball almost won this game, almost won that game. They don't have an SEC win. Vanderbilt football had a lot of games, one of them against Notre Dame, who's top 10 at the time, where you were like, wow, they really should have won that if it weren't for, one fumble, one drop ball, whatever you want to credit to. They still made a bowl game.
Yeah.
Even with those mistakes, those little mistakes that cost them games where we could have talked about, what should have happened or what almost happened. If they could fix those little things next year, who knows what this team's ceiling might be.
It could be really, really incredible, especially with all the talent that they have with Keyshawn Vaughn, Jared Pinkney, Elijah Lipscomb all coming back.
These guys are experienced.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see what happens on the defense. They're still in the mix for some grad transfer guys to help out what's going to be a very inexperienced secondary. So we'll certainly see how things shape out as the spring goes on. Before we wrap up here today, we got to touch on Vanderbilt baseball. Next week, at the end of next week, they'll be in Arizona for the MLB4 opening season tournament. And the biggest question going into this year, it's kind of a question, but more of, how Tim Corbin wants to approach things, the pitching rotation. They have their top 3 guys from last year coming back in Drake Fellows, Patrick Raby, and Mason Hickman, the sophomore. Then you also have the hard-throwing Kumar Rocker, who's going to try and make some noise. And they have a lot of other talent in the bullpen, like Justin Willis, Jackson Gillis, Zach King, a lot of different guys, Hugh Fisher as well, that have pitched in games before and that can pitch in midweeks and can provide a little bit of depth to this team. I mean, and Tim Corbin has said over and over again that, basically the best guys are going to start. If you got to pay your rent on your position. If you're not performing, you're going to be taken off the position no matter what year you are. But how do you approach this when you have these 3 guys that are so experienced, and yet you want to test out your brand new toy that you've got in Kumar Rocker that could be something really special?
I think that's what makes baseball such a unique sport, specifically college baseball, is that on a team like Vanderbilt, where they're preseason ranked #1 in the nation, have the best freshman class in the nation, this team is an elite team, you are competing for your job day in and day out. And of course, I'm going to want to say I want to see Kumar Rocker in from day one, because how could you not? I mean, it reminds me of like when Giannis Antetokounmpo was drafted, and you see this physical freak of nature who has no experience, but much like the massive Kumar Rocker who threw, 97, 98 miles an hour as a junior in high school, how do you not want to see that guy play? And I have no doubt that he will get at least a couple starts in throughout the course of the season. But what will be most important is that first one. How does he handle going to the big stage for the first time? If he could show some composure in that first start, he may not turn back from being a starter. But I will say for the time being, Raby, Fellows, Hickman, a great rotation with an even better bullpen, I'd say. And this team's, the ceiling is got to be a national championship right now.
Oh,
so
yeah.
Absolutely.
they'll be rotating these guys in and out of the rotation until they create what is, a flawless pitching rotation.
And I think that's the luxury that you have if you're Vanderbilt right now.
Absolutely.
Is not only are you're ranked this high, you have the best freshman class in the country, you have the best pitching core in the country. Like, there is no one better than Vanderbilt baseball at pitching the baseball right now. My goodness, almost said the wrong word. No, but again, this is all pretty speculative in terms of trying to discuss who's going to be in the rotation, who's going to be the starter, who's going to be the ace, etc. But I think if we're going off of nothing, and obviously we haven't seen practices yet, Tim Corbin will make decisions based off what he sees from the guys when they get out for spring training and what he's seen from them over the winter. But I think if we're going off of nothing else than what we know, then your top pitcher's got to be Patrick Raby. He was massively impressive last year. He'll be filling in the role for Chandler Day, who just went to the MLB. And beyond that, you've got Drake Fellows, and you've got Mason Hickman, who I really, really liked last year. I thought he progressed a lot being a freshman, and now he's only a sophomore now compared to the junior that is Fellows. Hopefully he's around for a while and he continues to develop and become the top pitcher that he can be at Vanderbilt. And then obviously getting to Kumar Rocker, everyone's excited about him. He's like that brand new toy, just a physical freak. I don't know if, without seeing him pitch, which again I mentioned Corbin has, so we'll see what his decision making is like having seen the kid pitch. But without having seen him, I wouldn't throw him directly into, like, say, a top 3, top 2, starting role. I would work him in slowly, and as he shows signs of progression, give him more keys to the car. Like, if he's got the hardware, just the arm, I should say, to pitch the lights out of the stadium. So if he's able to combine that with actually executing under pressure and making good decisions in the moment, then I don't see how he can't be even possibly the top pitcher by next season, or at least his junior year if he's still around by then.
And now, if I remember correctly, last year there was a similar situation with Pat DeMarco, who I believe wasn't the go-to guy, wasn't the starter day in and day out at the beginning of the season, at least as a freshman. But as Corbin slowly moved him into the lineup and he slowly got more experience, it became ever so clear that he should be in that lineup every day. And I think if he takes that same approach for Kumar Rocker, then he will have very high potential this season, and we'll see his progression right in front of our eyes.
It's the same thing with Austin Martin, too.
Yeah,
You throw him out there in that first series. Max Schneider, our associate sports editor, tells me directly before his first bat, why is Austin Martin leading off this lineup? He goes in and immediately hits a home run. So you never know with some of these guys. And I think what an intriguing proposition would be to see Rocker pitch in relief in this opening series in Arizona against some of the top teams in the country like Virginia, Cal State Fullerton, TCU. These are ranked teams for the most part, and these are elite baseball programs. And it would be tough to maybe throw him out there in a starting role in this. I think maybe you ease him in with some of those midweek non-conference games. But I think it would be very interesting to see how he does pitching in relief against some top level. I think you want to see him against the best, and this is a great opportunity right off the bat to do that.
Imagine a relief pitcher coming in to close the game and throwing faster than any pitcher you've seen all season, potentially. That would be something else.
Oh, my gosh. And when you look at him, he doesn't look like a freshman. He looks like he could be, 25 years old. He's just so massive.
He also looks like he could be on the football team.
Yeah, exactly. So I'll be excited to see when he finally makes his debut. And next weekend, Vanderbilt heads to Arizona to take on the MLB4 tournament against some of the best college baseball teams in the country. Another week of training in the meantime. Get excited. We'll have plenty more preseason coverage at VanderbiltHustler.com. With that, that'll do it for this week's episode of VU Sports Wired. Thank you so much to everyone for tuning in. We'll be back next week with a little more of an in-depth baseball preview right before the season gets underway. For Ryan Sheehy, Simon Gibbs, I'm Cutler Klein. So long. We'll see you next time.